Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the Jazz Standard. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe my videos both here on YouTube and Vimeo, as well as visit my website, thepacereport.com, for my weekly column, as well as my past segments. As you know, here on the Pace Report, I like to profile the next generation of musicians that are carrying the rich tradition of American roots music. Tonight here at the Jazz Standard, you're going to witness the musicianship of pianist Connie. Now, Connie hails from Los Angeles, California, and she's 23 years old. And her current CD, Crime Zone, which is now available on Mack Avenue Records, has been taking the jazz world literally by storm. In fact, this summer she's on tour. She's playing some of the most prestigious jazz festivals. And tonight she's playing music from her current record. Now, what I really like about her is that she really has taken a lot of the rich tradition of great piano players like Mulgrew Miller, as well as Kenny Kirkland, as well as McCoy Tyner, and she's taken their language and made it her language, and she's taken her own style and her compositions to a whole nother level. Tonight I had a chance to sit down and break bread with Miss Connie, and we talked about the new record. We talked about and reflect on her influences, as well as talk about what she's going to do to this music moving forward. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the sounds of Miss Connie performing music from her current Mack Avenue Records release, Crime Zone, here at the Jazz Standards, part of the Pace Report, here in New York City. followed you from, I guess, the very beginning. And this whole year has been whirlwind for you. How are you feeling with all the success and also the response of this new record?
Great. I'm feeling super excited to be spreading my message about my music and spreading the great tradition of jazz piano through my own style and being able to just experience the things I've experienced with being able to travel the world. And I'm really just trying to play the best music I can for these audiences and making it worth their while as well as my while. So.
At 22, 23, what is Connie Hines' message in the music?
You don't have to deconstruct the building blocks of jazz in order to be original. And what I mean by that is straight ahead jazz and the tradition of jazz is happening now. It's happening in the moment, and creativity is happening genuinely. I find too often that when musicians play straight ahead jazz, it can often be it can often fall into the trap of being a recreation of a museum art form. And my message is that it's a raw creative process that is happening in the moment, like I said, and that you can still be provocative, edgy, and pushing the envelope while still having a great respect for the jazz language that originated from the evolution from Bird, Dizzy, Red Garland, Errol Garner, Oscar Peterson, Wynton Kelly, up to Herbie, Chick Corea, and my personal favorite influences, Kenny Kirkland, Mulgrew Miller. The Young Lions especially is a huge influence in my playing and especially my writing. I cite Black Codes from the Underground as one of my favorites, most influential, just groundbreaking records that exhibit the exact philosophy that I'm talking about, where you have these amazingly original arrangements and instrumentation and approach to rhythm, especially, that is like bottomless creatively. So that's the kind of music that really resonates with me and that I always find inspiration from and draw from in order to create my original music. So, yeah, I mean, you don't have to deconstruct jazz language in order to have something novel to say. You know what I mean?
I got you.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why I did this. I mean, we had great jazz writers, Langston Hughes, we had Ira Gitler, and I used to read all of these liner notes by these great jazz writers who contributed to the history and the idiom of the music as well as the musician. And I think the biggest problem I'm having with communicating this is the fact that people think that jazz is supposed to be confined to just the jazz clubs, and now we're expanding off to museums. But this music is original, it's ours, it was devoted and created here, and I'm very interested in how you have taken the idiom and fine tuned some things as far as going back to the masters.
I think you can't really be a legitimate jazz musician without drawing from the masters and drawing from that language because to me jazz is a historical art form, and as Mulgrew Miller once put it, jazz is part progressive art and part folk art, and you can't really have one without the other because how can it be progressive when it's not relating to something else, right? It's kind of like the yin and yang thing. So to me, there's a certain integrity that you have to maintain in the music that is drawn from the original source material of the masters. So I already mentioned quite a few guys, but McCoy Tyner is one of them. John Coltrane and his quartet. He's a That's just a huge influence in my playing, as well as Joe Henderson and his records, In and Out, Inner Urge, Page One, and actually I was just listening to Unity by Larry Young, which has Woody Shaw, Joe Henderson, Elvin Jones, and to me that's like another example of the philosophy that I keep on talking about. I mean, there's so many records, but to me that's like one of the most inspirational ones because it just, the band has that chemistry. And that's another thing. Jazz is a social art form, and when people connect, that's when it's at its peak. You know, when musicians are able to really play with each other and phrase with each other, or they can play together while also phrasing differently. And that's another fun thing about jazz, in that there's a gritty rub to how people play together. They don't always have to be playing the same stuff all the time. In fact, the more interesting and most musical recordings have people playing pretty diverse information simultaneously, but still making it work through a deep connection to the rhythm and the swing feel. So, yeah, I mean, overall, my message is really that straight ahead jazz shouldn't be taken at face value as just like a swing and ride cymbal and a walk and bass line. It's so much deeper. You can go so far into the nuances of like the styles of different musicians and like Billy Higgins and Elvin Jones. That's like a huge difference, but they both have like a beat that is so instantly recognizable. And I honestly find that the younger generation these days have a harder time appreciating that nuance, and I want to like bring that to the forefront, you know, in my music.
You brought up Black Codes from the Underground. Now, let me paint a picture of where I was when that record came out. I was in middle school when that record came out. And this was the time when Wynton was going into this phase. He had J Mood and Standards Volume 1. There's another one that I'm missing also in that era. But that band that he had really kind of was the catalyst for the Young Lions. If anything spoke of the whole 90s and the 80s of the Young Lions, it was that particular group.
Absolutely.
What was it about that recording that opened your ears musically and sonically to what Jeff Tain Watts was playing, Bob Hurst, Kenny Kirkland, and Wynton?
First of all, the rhythmic energy. There is no record, I mean, really no record that has that high intensity driving swing feel. Like, that's what I think defines the Young Lions, like this super burnout, like really intense commitment to the swing feel while also being really rhythmically daring and edgy, because it followed the Young Lions movement, where they returned to the acoustic jazz setup, was directly following the jazz fusion guys. So like indirectly, this may sound controversial, I think because of the complexity, rhythmic complexity that can often sound kind of stiff in jazz fusion, kind of indirectly informed some of the more modern interpretations in the rhythms that those guys were playing in the 90s, the Young Lions, I mean. So I really think it's defined by that, first of all, commitment to swing, and that commitment to like the tradition and the sensibility of the tradition, while also having like this super modern twist, especially when like for example, Kenny and Tain are accompanying Wynton. Like that's like just their interaction and the way they play off each other's phrases is something that you've just never heard before. And in addition to that, the arrangements that Wynton has are just, especially the horn harmonies between tenor and trumpet, they're just unlike anything you've ever heard. I wish I could explain it more specifically, but it's that's kind of my take on Black Codes. In addition to that, Kenny Kirkland, he's always been my favorite pianist since I was like 14 years old. And my first experience with Kenny Kirkland was actually with his trio recording on his only record under his name.
TRP.
Yeah, yeah. And I listened to Chance with Tain and Christian McBride, and I've never heard anyone play a jazz waltz like that. It's just so swinging, and the harmonies are so dark and deep, and that's one of the things I love about Kenny and his compositions, but also his approach to the piano. He like digs into the keys really deep, deeper than I think a lot of piano players. And some, piano purists might say, oh, it's too harsh. Oh, there's no dynamics, there's no dimension. It's like, well, it's driven by the rhythm, and that's where the dimension is. He's like a percussionist at the piano, and I've always loved Kenny because of that. And when I listen to Black Codes, those are some of the best solos that Kenny has ever recorded. Like his phrasing is just off the chain, and his comping is sometimes even better than his blowing, and it's kind of hard to even compare. Like his comping is just, ooh, yeah. So
it's interesting when you brought up comping. You just read my mind. I read something very interesting about you, that you have this fine line between comping and practicing and playing. How do you improvise, and how do you practice, and how do you play without comping? Because I know comping is that you're transcribing solos and the different rhythms and the different patterns, but how do you separate both of them?
comping and soloing.
Yes.
Honestly, I just think of what is the most musical thing that I could possibly do here. They're honestly pretty synonymous in the goal, in provoking a positive, or sometimes not even positive. Sometimes you just want to challenge the band with what you play and provoke a certain response. And those are some of the things that I like to think about when I'm on the bandstand. But really, when I practice, it's funny because I like to reserve like okay, I'm going to be super creative now for the bandstand. And in my practice room, I can be pretty professor-like because I want to maintain my technique and my vocabulary, as well as expand upon it. And you can't really expand upon it unless you just get down to the dirty work and just do it. You can't really afford to be abstract all the time. But then when I do that, that's one particular segment in my practicing process. The other process, the creative process, I do dedicate like a pure segment of time to that. Comping and soloing are really, they've become synonymous for me. I mean, when I was younger, I used to think like, oh man, they're completely different things. But when you're comping, you're actually still playing melodies and developing phrasing in the same way that you do with blowing. The very the biggest difference is that you are more selfless when you're comping. When you're taking a solo, you can be as narcissistic as you please, with reason, within reason. You have to play with the band, of course. But the only difference I would say is that comping, you are definitely responsible for inspiring the band as well as the soloist. So, but otherwise, the core philosophy and goal is to make music with your bandmates. So I hope that answers your question.
Crime Zone, your second release, your debut album on Mac Avenue Records. You know, I'm listening to this record and I said, wow, I mean, we've got Fender Rhodes, we've got the trio, we've got the quartet, we got trumpet, we got tenor, we've got Sweeney Todd, we've got a whole bunch of stuff on this album. First of all, what were you going into in in your thought process when you were composing these songs, what did you want to attribute to your knowledge of the music, but what did you want your fans to get out of this record?
This just goes back to my original explanation about reinforcing my philosophy about acoustic traditional jazz and showing that you can still be raw, spontaneous, and hip, honestly. And that was, I mean, I wasn't thinking about that all the time when I was writing. When I'm writing, I just want to make good music and I just want to follow through on the concepts that I go through on. But, you know, I think that philosophy comes through organically just because that's what I am and I can't help but be that when I'm writing. But I couldn't have done everything on this record without my producer, drummer, and musical director, Bill Wyszowski. He, first of all, he arranged Pretty Women, that Sweeney Todd tune, and he's a huge Sondheim head and turned me on to Sondheim. And, you know, originally I wasn't going to go to Rhodes on Another Kind of Right, the opening track, but he was like, man, you should really switch from piano to Rhodes when you get to the solo because it's going to be like a breath of fresh air. And like when we did it, I was like, man. So it was great getting to collaborate with Bill because he has this vision, because he gets exactly what I am, what I do, and we actually share quite a few of the same musical values. I mean, my right-hand man, pretty much. So in addition to that, we co-wrote on Crime Zone. I think we co-wrote on Remember This. And Is That So is one of his arrangements. And it's just really nice to get to work with people who are not only brilliant, competent, but get you, you know? Because in jazz, like, it can be such a potpourri and just like a diverse mass of philosophy and thoughts. Like, there are the purists, traditionalists, and then there are people who, like, man, you don't even need to swing to play jazz. And it's like, we have these, like, especially nowadays, just this diverse array of schools of thought. And that's great. You know, I like being confronted with people who disagree with me because it challenges my point of view. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, at the same time, it's also really nice to work with people who, like, share the same musical aesthetic. So, yeah.
That's great because we'll go back to the Fender Rhodes, you know. Now you can appreciate what Bob James laid out.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's a great pianist, but when you play a Fender Rhodes, and even if I go back to Ray Charles, and even Chick Corea did a great record with Stan Getz where he and Stanley Clarke, and he's playing the Fender Rhodes. The Rhodes adds a whole nother palette to the piano.
Oh, absolutely. It's just so freaking hip. I mean, it sounds like, as soon as you hear someone play the Rhodes, you're like, man, that's some tasty. Like, you have to work a little bit harder at the piano to make it tasty, but like when you're at the Rhodes, you're like, man, everything I play sounds great. So,
You're tasty, you're right, because when I think of tasty, I think of D'Angelo.
Yeah.
And D'Angelo, in his first record, he went crazy on that Fender Rhodes.
Oh yeah, I mean that sound is so distinctive. And now that you mentioned Bob James, like, man, Bob James does some amazing Fender Rhodes work on obviously his own stuff, but he also plays the Fender Rhodes on a Chet Baker record called "She Was Too Good to Me." Yep, and that was one of my influences for sure in playing the Rhodes. But also, like, you know, his hits, Westchester Lady, and Nautilus. Thank you for mentioning that. But yeah, in addition to Bob James, Herbie, Chick, they played the Fender Rhodes. And it's funny because there are some cats out there that I really respect who, when they play Fender Rhodes, it's like, oh man, that kind of doesn't work. But like, the reason I say that is that even though when I say, oh, everything I play sounds good, you do have to have a sensibility and be acquainted with the art of playing the Fender Rhodes piano. So, yeah, it's pretty sweet.
deeper, I noticed that a lot of the technique and the stuff we've been talking about, that stems from your mother's classical training that she started on you as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very privileged to come from a musical family. My mom is a classical piano instructor, as well as an expert in the guzheng, which is a Chinese zither, which is the equivalent of a Japanese koto. Yeah, so my parents have a classical background as well as a background in traditional Chinese music. So I came up with a pretty solid foundation in classical piano, but also a pretty good acquaintance with like that style of music, which is totally different from jazz. So it was like switching completely different languages for me when I pursued jazz, and that was a challenge, but also at the same time made it easier for me in some ways because I felt that when I was learning jazz in high school, I never felt constricted by my physical limitations on the piano. You know, I felt like I was able to really focus on style, repertoire, rhythm, harmony. So, yeah, I would say that I can thank my parents for the technique that I was able to have.
Do you listen to other musics besides just jazz and classical?
I used to, and currently I don't really. But when I was younger, like when I was trying to figure out what I was into, I used to listen to like metal, like death metal, and prog rock. I liked Yes, Gentle Giants.
Jethro Tull.
Yeah, I was digging into that stuff, and I was really curious about it, and as well as Pink Floyd. I just liked thought-provoking music, you know, even like some indie hipster stuff, you know. And it eventually just led me to jazz because I just was craving something that had that improvisational element to it, that spontaneity, and I felt like prog rock was like my weird gateway into that stuff.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about Yes, I mean, one of the co-founding members of Yes is a big, big jazz head.
Yeah, a lot of those guys in like the really good prog rock bands like have a pretty good understanding of like jazz and they know the jazz records. So like I mean, oftentimes they always cite like, oh yeah, you know, we try to incorporate jazz, traditional folk music into our stuff. And honestly, most prog rock bands always say they're influenced by jazz, whether they are or not.
Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah.
we're on the subject
Yeah.
of prog rock. I mean, we're looking at Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and
Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
Keith Emerson definitely.
Yep.
If there's anybody, and then we go to the funk side. We look at Bernie Worrell from Parliament Funkadelic.
Mm-hmm.
Those cats really were classically as well as jazz trained.
Yeah. I think people should have more respect for prog rock in that sense because most of the musicians who do that style of music, they have to be great, very knowledgeable musicians. And I feel like jazz is kind of inescapable in that way. That's one of the things I really like about being a jazz musician is that the skill set you gain from jazz is so like complex that you can really diversify if you really want to. At this time, well, actually, I really hope to dedicate the rest of my life to the style of music I'm playing now. But yeah, I mean, when I was younger, and I was trying to figure out the stuff that I really liked, I had always gravitated toward like less mainstream music and just stuff that was like not intended to be consumed like en masse, like music that was intended to provoke the listener to really think and convey a message that had substance. And to me, jazz really hit that spot for me when I found it.
Connie Hahn, what does jazz music mean to you?
It's my life. It's what I breathe. To me, it's like I am at my most primal when I'm on stage. Like the primal human instinct to me, like I'm the most in touch with that when like I'm playing. And I'm just gonna say it, it's like sex. Yeah, yeah, and we got to bring the sex back into jazz because I think it's too sterilized sometimes, and
Yeah.
I want to bring that back because like that's what you feel when you play at the height of like creative music. You know, you just feel like human, and you just feel you're not thinking about stupid stuff. You're just being you, and you're just really in touch with what it means to be human. I can't even, I mean, other people, I mean, John Coltrane, for example, I think he may have experienced something similar by getting closer to God. And to me, it's like in the same plane. You know what I mean? So that's what I have to say.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at the Jazz Standard here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the incomparable Miss Connie Hahn for her time. Make sure you buy her CD, Crime Zone, which is now available on Mac Avenue Records. You can order it at macavenue.com as well as cdbaby.com and amazon.com. Make sure you go out and support her summer tour, which is coming to a city near you. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at the Jazz Standard for their warm hospitality. As always, please like, share, and subscribe my videos here on both YouTube as well as Vimeo, and visit my website, thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.